Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. In this module, we're going to cover the cardiovascular system, and in the first video, we're going to talk about the pericardium, the heart location and relations. So when we talk about the gross anatomy of the heart, it's very important we know the location of the heart. The heart is located in the middle mediastinum. And if you're asking yourself what would be the mediastinum, it's basically the area between the sternal angle above all the way down to the level of T12. It's even subdivided into superior mediastinum and inferior mediastinum. And by the heart, the inferior mediastinum is further subdivided into anterior, middle, and posterior. So the heart is located in the middle mediastinum. The concept of the mediastinum will be covered in the respiratory module, but the only thing you need to know here is that the heart is located in the middle mediastinum, and middle mediastinum is basically the important area that's in the middle of the thoracic cavity between the two lungs. Now, if you look at this diagram, you will get to see that the anterior relation of the heart would be the sternum, and posteriorly, you have three important structures: the descending thoracic aorta, the esophagus, and the esophagus. If you look at the right side, you will get to see the esophagus vein. So remember that the esophagus, the thoracic aorta, and the esophagus are the posterior relations of the heart. And if you look at a photographic photo, of a cadaver, you will see here the esophagus vein. When it's on the right side, it's basically a posterior relation. And on the left side, you will see the aorta here and also the esophagus. So these are the three important structures, posterior relations to the heart. Now, on the right and left side, you have the two lungs, and the lungs are covered by the pleura. Pleura is basically the plural word for pleura. So if we say that one lung is covered by pleura, then we are saying two lungs are covered by pleurae. So these are the two right and left relations of the heart. Now, what would be the superior relation? It's basically the major vessels, because you guys know that we have important vessels coming out of the heart itself superiorly, and we have veins getting into that. So these are the superior relations. And talking about the inferior relations, that would be the diaphragm and the liver. What does the diaphragm mean? It means a partition between two cavities. And in here, the two cavities are the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity. So the heart is resting on the diaphragm, and the diaphragm is on the top of the liver. So as a recap, the relations of the heart anteriorly would be the sternum, posteriorly aorta, esophagus, and esophagus. Right and left, we have the lungs and pleurae, right and left, and this is in a cross section, right and left. And then superiorly, we have the major vessels. Now, moving on, we need to talk about the covering of the heart. So the heart is located inside a pericardium. So what does pericardium mean? Peri in Latin means surrounding, cardium in Latin means heart. So the pericardium is basically the covering of the heart. We have two types of pericardium. One that is the fibrous, and the other one is serous. The fibrous is a tough membrane that takes the shape of the heart. This is where the heart is located. Fibrous pericardium is very important because it is attached to the structures around it, and it's important to support the heart in its position. It takes the shape of the heart, and you get to see the heart resting inside the pericardium, the fibrous pericardium. However, the serous one, it's formed of a serous membrane, and that is basically a closed serous sac um, 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 through which the heart was developing. Now, let's take a picture and try to imagine how things are going. If you look at this diagram, you will see that the heart is sitting inside the pericardium. If you see a tough membrane that is covering the heart totally, and it's attaching to the surrounding structures, That's going to be the fibrous pericardium. The fibrous pericardium is attached superiorly and it is continuous with the pretracheal fascia of the deep cervical fascia. It is also attached down to the diaphragm, to the central tendon, by the pericardiophenic ligament. It's also attached to right and left sides, and it's also attached to the sternum anteriorly by the pericardiosternal ligaments. So it's important to know that this fibrous tough membrane, it takes the shape of the heart. It's where the heart is supported in the middle mediastinum. However, if we remove the heart, and if you look at a cadaver and you cannot see the external features of the heart, it means that the fibrous pericardium is intact in that picture. However, if we remove the fibrous pericardium, we will come to see the serous pericardium, which is the transparent membrane. Now, how is the serous pericardium formed? If you look at this diagram, it shows you that during the development of the heart, it was pushing against a closed serous sac. So that closed serous sac is your serous pericardium. And once the heart starts to push against that, it attains two layers because it's basically a double layer of a sac. Now, the layer that is attached to the heart, we call it visceral pericardium because it's attached to your viscera, which is the heart in this case. And then the outside layer, which lines the fibrous pericardium outside, if you look here, the gray one is the fibrous pericardium. So what lines that part is the parietal layer of serous pericardium. So overall, we have the fibrous pericardium outside that attaches the heart to the surrounding structures and it supports the heart and keeps it in position. And you have two layers of the serous pericardium, one that is attached to the heart intimately, and the other layer it lines the fibrous one. That is what we call the serous pericardium. And remember that when you talk about and when you take the histology of the heart, remember that the visceral layer of serous pericardium is basically the epicardium. It's exactly the same. But in histology, we say it's epi because it's the outermost layer. We kind of explain the structures in histology by layers. So that's why we call it epicardium. But in gross anatomy, we say it's visceral pericardium. So this is basically the visceral pericardium. And the parietal layer, it lines the fibrous one that we can see here. Okay, so by that, everyone understands what do we mean by pericardium. And if you look at this dotted line, it shows you where the fibrous pericardium is, but it has been removed in this picture. All right. Now, there is a very important concept when we talk about the pericardium. We need to wrap up this topic talking about this before we end up talking about the heart location and pericardium. So during the development of the heart, you guys have your primordial heart tube developing, and as I said earlier, it starts to push against the double layers of your serous pericardium. As that happens, the heart starts to develop, it starts to grow, and then it starts to loop. And then the arterial end of that primordial heart starts to come at a close contact with the venous end. As that happens, you will get to have a space, which is what we call sinus, and that sinus is basically running transversely. So that is a very important sinus. We call it the transverse pericardial sinus. It's transverse because it runs transversely. Pericardial because it happens between the two layers of the pericardium, and sinus because it's basically a space. So if you put your finger behind the arterial pole or the arterial end or the arterial part of the heart and between the venous part of the heart, so behind the aorta and the pulmonary trunk anteriorly, and you have posteriorly the veins, it means this is the transverse pericardial sinus. However, during the development with the enlargement of the veins, you will start to have another sinus, and that is basically your oblique sinus, and we call it oblique pericardial sinus because it runs obliquely. And how will you reach this? When you put your hand below the heart, actually the heart has been removed here. So if you put your hand here obliquely and you come to a point where you cannot go anymore because of the reflection of the pericardium, this is going to be your oblique pericardial sinus. So again, you have oblique pericardial sinus. It's a space between the two layers of the pericardium. All right, and that would be between your pulmonary veins, right and left. This is the oblique sinus. However, the transverse pericardial sinus is between the arteries and veins, the arteries anteriorly and veins posteriorly. The arteries are the aorta and pulmonary trunk anteriorly, and the veins posteriorly would be the superior vena cava and the superior pulmonary veins, right and left. All right. So if you look at this, you will see that here is the heart. If you put your fingers between the aorta and pulmonary trunk anteriorly and the veins are posteriorly, you are in the transverse pericardial sinus, where you get to see this green wire. However, if you put your hand here back to the heart, you have another space where you can put your hand back to the heart. That is the oblique pericardial sinus. It's made by the reflection of pericardium back. And that is basically between the two inferior pulmonary veins, right and left. So these are the references for today's video. Thanks for watching, you guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you, and see you in the next video.